here. Let me know if you can see okay.
Peter, we're good now.
Oh, sounds like we're good now. Great. So let us know where you're joining from. I'd like to introduce our star-studded panel here one by one, just in order here. First of all, a familiar face from another broadcaster roundtable, Liza Donnelly. Would love to invite Liza up on screen here. Oh, fantastic.
Hi,
we also have with us Daniel from Freedom News TV, and here we go, Peter Stern. So 3 amazing journalists with 3 very different kind of specializations. Liza Donnelly, many of you will know from The New Yorker, longtime editorial cartoonist, has done some amazing work here on Happs with regular drawing, sketching, some watercolors, super talented, lots of political commentary. Peter Stern of Stern Look, many of you will recognize him from his show covering a variety of issues with a journalistic lens, often invites on other top-notch journalists. Peter has worked with Politico and been a contributor to many top national publications. He's also worked with press freedom organizations, and we'll hear more about his work with those as well. And Daniel with us from Freedom News TV from New York City, really covering some hard breaking news stories, covering the night shift. We've seen Daniel cover everything from hostage situations here on Happs to, you know, buses dangling off over the freeway. It's always, you know, dramatic and really amazing, some of the experiential journalism that Daniel demonstrates here on the platform. So 3 very different you know, talents represented. I'd love to just thank each and every one of you for joining us here, and thanks for tuning in the comments. I see a British Spy, Jim, Yassine, Isabel, amazing, Isa here, Lucia. So let's just start with you, Liza. Would you mind introducing yourself for those who may not know you, and explain what you do on Happs?
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm a cartoonist and a writer. I've been, as you said, with The New Yorker for 40 years, but I also work with a lot of other publications, The New York Times, Washington Post. I think I've done something for Politico, their roundtable of cartoonists, and political commentary as I'm drawing about politics. And sometimes the politics is culture, not necessarily political, but it's a commentary about culture and politics. And I just, sometimes it's a curated political cartoon, not curated, but an actual idea that I draw the cartoon, or sometimes it's just I come up with it as I'm on Happs and talk with my viewers about the idea and the issues that I want to express. And I do a lot of stuff about women's rights. I do also a lot of stuff about press freedom. I interviewed a lawyer from the Reporters Committee, which is a press freedom organization on Happs. We had an interview, and we're going to do another one soon, because cartoonists are also, although like I was talking with, is it David? Sorry, Peter. Apologies. I was talking with Peter earlier, and cartoonists are at risk, but not their lives are not at risk in this country, but they are struggling. It's really interesting. I work with a cartoonist group called Cartooning for Peace in Paris. And yeah, I guess that's about the breadth of it. I also do, when on my tablet and live draw that way. So I hope to do more of that. I've done some of that perhaps in New York City, where I'm based, but a lot of difficulty with the pandemic right now traveling. But when that's over, I will be out in the field drawing things that I see out in the world. Right now, my studio drawing there. So
fantastic. Thanks for that overview. Everyone subscribe to Liza, follow her daily cartooning live here on Happs. Peter, tell the viewers here what they can expect when they tune in to Stern Look.
Thank you, Peter. So Stern Look is a talk show about journalism and politics that I launched here on Happs a few months ago. the idea is to introduce viewers to journalists who are covering issues that are important in the world, usually related to politics or social issues, and give them the chance to obviously ask questions of these journalists, and also give the journalists a platform to explain to my viewership what it is that they do, what kinds of issues they cover, what they wish that their audiences knew. Because I've worked as a journalist for a number of years, certainly not as many as Liza, but I have worked as a journalist for a few years, and I've also covered journalism. I did media reporting at Politico for a few years during the Obama administration. So I feel that I have an understanding of not just what it means to be a journalist, but how journalism institutions and especially the culture of journalism operates. And I think that's something that people who are not in the industry don't always understand. What does it mean when something is off the record? What does it mean when you have a dateline? What does it mean when you have a multiple byline story versus people contributing? What is it like to be a freelance writer? I've also tried to focus on beats that I think a lot of people know about, but they might not understand all the intricacies of it. So I've talked to White House correspondents about what it's like covering the Trump White House. I've talked to immigration reporters about what it means to write about immigration policy and the nuances of immigration policy that people might not understand. I've talked to Indigenous reporters about what it's like reporting on Indian country and other Indigenous issues, which is something that I feel does not get enough coverage among US mainstream journalism. It's something you see a lot more often in Canada, actually reporting on Indigenous issues and First Nations issues. So I just see this show as a great opportunity to allow journalists who I think are doing interesting work to explain what they're doing to a larger audience that may not be familiar with it. And then also, because of Happs, it allows the audience to ask questions of the journalists, to make comments and to ask questions that I can then bring up on the screen and present to the journalists and just kind of be a guide or a mediator in those conversations between journalists and the audience.
Absolutely, yeah. Love your show. Everyone, please subscribe to Peter and follow Stern Look. So, Daniel, tell us a little bit about what folks can expect if they subscribe to you right now, which everyone totally should. Daniel has some amazing experiential stuff, but tell us about what you're up to on Happs these days.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Basically, I respond to a lot of stuff that happens overnight. Well, what I mean by stuff is obviously news is 24 hours. And at 11 o'clock at night, the news stations, cameramen, their union guys, they go home. And that means the 5 boroughs, New York City is uncovered. Guys like me, we go out there, we film breaking news or news for the 4 o'clock show. Basically, those are shootings, stabbings, accidents, and or fires. And unfortunately, we do report on possibly the worst day of people's lives, but it still needs to get reported. We film it ourselves. We do the story ourselves, and then we submit it to the stations, and hopefully they purchase the material and tell our story. And to tell the story of the people who are affected by, let's just say a huge fire and stuff like that.
Wow.
Right. So heavy stuff, right? I mean, it feels like, an action movie. You've literally been on the scene before of hostage situations. As we were mentioning earlier, buses dangling over freeways, really, pretty intense. You do a great job, in my opinion, walking everyone through the scene. Oh, did we lose visual? Here we are. I think we're both on screen now. Here we are. So I think you do a wonderful job being very sensitive and keeping your head cool and walking through the scenes, being very communicative with police officers. Almost every time you're there engaging with first responders too. Clearly, you have a good relationship with them. Tell us how long you've been doing this, Daniel. Tell us about your background, how you got into it.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. It's very important to establish a good relationship with first responders because a lot of times they're reaching out to you for the video for, let's just say, a fire. You're filming, you see a firefighter climbing up the ladder through a window. He'll reach out to you for that video. I got started roughly about 2.5 years ago. I actually started with a cell phone. I was taking videos through this app called Citizen, and then I found out they used my video, but they didn't pay me for it, and so I decided to do it myself and not submit videos and not use the Citizen app. Citizen app, I don't know if you have it in your area, but it alerts you when things are going on, fires or anything. And then they tell you to take a video before you leave. So I didn't understand that concept, but the adrenaline for me was getting the video, getting the story, and so I did. And then I realized again, wow, I'm not going to do this for free if I can get paid for it, right? I mean, who would? So I decided to use my phone, submit to the stations, met some contacts out there, and next thing you know, it became a full-time thing during the pandemic. March 17th, I believe, was my last, my first official full-time day working as a overnight videographer journalist.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, clearly, you're so passionate. You're out there all night, changing your normal schedule, I would assume, to be able to cover these stories that no one else is really. They wouldn't really get covered otherwise oftentimes, but you and your team are out there. What I'd like to do now is actually go around to the three of you and maybe just ask what you think some of the biggest misconceptions are about your style of journalism, and maybe something you could share with the audience that they may not know or realize. For example, Liza, maybe you could start and talk a little bit about what it's like working for so many years as an editorial cartoonist.
Where do I start? Let's see. Well,
no pressure. We can also come back to you. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, it's okay. As I said, I've been with the New Yorker magazine for 40 years, and many of those cartoons are not what you might think of as political. They're just about life and humor in life. But some of them are political, and they're a very different kind of political cartoon. But I do, in more recent years, I started doing more harder-hitting political cartoons about politics and about global issues and feminism and women's rights. And those I publish on Medium and have done for some other publications. So it's you come up with ideas every day. I mean, for Happs, I try to come up with something when I'm going to be broadcasting. I try to come up with an idea based on what's in the news, and it could be culture, as I said, or political. And it's also very hard sometimes to find an image that would not only, I mean, it's not always funny, but an image that would say something about what I'm focusing on. The other day I did a drawing on Happs, and it was a live drawing, and it was about not breaking news, but it was about the Biden-Harris administration and their new commission or council, I guess they're calling it, on gender. So I wanted to talk about that and explore that, and just when I do my broadcasts, I read up on it a little bit beforehand and talk about what I'm hearing, what I'm thinking, how this is going to affect the issue going forward. And I'm drawing, like I drew some women, different images of women, and we have to see it. It's on my last broadcast. But so it's often just exploring an issue with my viewers and hoping to get feedback from them on what I'm talking about. And broadcasting is fun and interesting. I've been doing it before Happs. I've been doing it on my own with my iPad, and sometimes it's not political. It's more like what I'm seeing, where I am. Like I've been to the Oscars 5 times. I've been to the Academy Awards to live draw what I see there. I've been to the White House to draw a press conference. I've been to the DNC and the inauguration of Trump. So drawing, it's a visual kind of reportage that I put out on social immediately. Because I think visuals can be really interesting for that it's not word-based. So, I'll stop there.
I just shared one of my favorite recent ones, the fermentation.
Oh, yeah.
Cultural commentary is so spot on. Just check out Liza's website as well. Love to switch gears and hear from you, Peter, as far as your work, which really goes so deep into freedom issues, and there's been obviously a lot in recent months and years in this realm. Would you mind just kind of covering some of the work that you've done specifically related to the Press Freedom Tracker and some of those issues that you touch upon on your show?
Yeah, so I worked at Politico for 3 years during the Obama administration, covering the media industry. And then after Trump's inauguration, I left Politico and went to the Freedom of the Press Foundation. So kind of a bit of a shift in gears from, traditional reporting to more kind of a nonprofit advocacy type space. And at Freedom of the Press Foundation, I wrote about press freedom issues in the US. And I also launched a project called the US Press Freedom Tracker, which is an online database that documents different press freedom incidents that occur in the US. So by press freedom incident, that generally means when a journalist gets physically attacked, when they get arrested, when the police seize their camera, when they are subpoenaed to testify in court and reveal their confidential sources, all of these things that can happen to journalists in the US. If you're interested in going to the Press Freedom Tracker, the URL is pressfreedomtracker.us.
Pablo just shared it there as well.
Yeah, I think you've got it in the chat. And that launched in 2017. We just wanted to document these issues because we anticipated that it would probably get worse under the Trump administration, since he was so rhetorically against the press and calling them the enemies of the American people. So we documented the number of press freedom incidents in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. I left the project in 2019, but they've obviously continued to document it. And I continue to contribute reporting to them as well. And what we found is that 2020 was by far the worst year for press freedom incidents. The sheer number of journalists who were physically attacked, and especially who were arrested while covering demonstrations last year, was orders of magnitude greater than it had been in previous years. Back when we started this in 2017, people didn't really think of the US as being a country where press freedom was at risk. The US was seen as the one where journalists had the most freedom and were the least at risk. And obviously, I'm not saying that the US is as bad as, say, Mexico, where journalists are being assassinated. But certainly, I think people have come to understand that if you're a journalist, especially if you're a journalist who's covering street demonstrations in the US, you really are at risk. There's a very high likelihood you will be arrested by police, just swept up. You might have to spend the night in jail. It's not like Turkey where you're going to be jailed for 10 years, fortunately. But ideally, we would not be arresting journalists who are just doing their jobs. So I think that is one thing that people maybe didn't realize a few years ago, but have come to understand.
Absolutely, yeah. Such an important topic that's near and dear to me personally. I've known, many colleagues I went to journalism school with, for example, back in the day, who've been bullied or harassed or beaten up and robbed at protests in the last year. So it's no joke. It's definitely a very critical issue here for democracy as well. And I'm glad that you're covering it. Would love to, pass the torch, so to speak, over to Daniel and ask you a little bit about, what's some of the most misunderstood aspects of your overnight crime scene reporting?
Thank you for asking, Peter. I just wanted to let Peter Stern know. I mean, he's really do appreciate your work. I know a Daily News guy a photographer who really was just attacked a few days ago by a protest in Manhattan. And I know him very well. He's been in the industry for a very long time. I met him, covering some stories, here in New York City area. So it's pretty good work that Peter Stern that you're doing, and I really do appreciate that. On to Peter Brittner, your question. People think that I get off on people's misery or misfortune, and it's not the case. If I'm not recording that, somebody else is going to, because I do have competition, and there's people out there with their cell phones, and people out there with their cell phones, they're not doing it to filming to report it or to, monetary way to make money. They're doing it for kicks, and they sell it or they send it to their friends and they post it online and the video goes viral. And here the only ones making money off that is the social media companies. But that's why it's very rare you see one of my videos posted prematurely on social media. So when the people do go live and they do see that raw footage that I'm providing to them on the broadcast, it's a first-hand account of the event that's happening. And a lot of times it hits the news. If it's this scene right here, right behind me, if you guys take a look at that, that was a dangling bus scene that hit national news and all the local news. I went out of my way to, get the shot. And, again, it's just telling the story from, a different perspective, I guess.
No doubt. Yeah, such important work. And, I think you do a much better job. You have such respect, too, for the whole situation. Everyone, subscribe to Daniel to check out some of his broadcasts. But you work hard there and you're multitasking. You're out there often getting footage, both with your normal video camera to send in to the news companies, primarily, New York City based or New York State based, right? But you also are simultaneously sometimes recording live stream on Happs, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I literally have like seconds to open the app up, put in a brief description, put in a couple hashtags, and put the phone back in so you guys can take a look. If not, it's it's an intense thing, but I think I've got it down a little bit. So what if you see me driving it for a couple blocks or 5 minutes or so? But at least when we get there, I don't have to worry about going on live and grabbing the phone.
Do you ever have a night when there's nothing going on?
Yeah, when there's nothing going on, I do not go on live. Yeah, because I just didn't want to, there's nothing to see, just me sitting in a car. I've done it before. I've done it before to engage with the.
You underestimate your charm. People would love to just hang out with you in your car at 3 a.m. You'd be surprised, I think. So. I've tuned in.
Yeah, I've done it.
One question that I have for Daniel is, you're selling the exclusive footage that you take to local news networks. Are they concerned that you are simultaneously broadcasting it on Happs?
No, not at all. They don't care. They just want the footage. If they want that story and I'm there and I got decent footage, they just want to tell the story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're happy that I'm out there. They're happy that I'm out there, as well as the competition as well. I'm not going to go remiss without saying there is competition. So it's not like it's only me and, I'm getting all the market. No, we got another guy who's with another company and he does pretty well for himself, and the best shooter wins. The best videographer wins.
To that question, in my case, I do a weekly, we call them batches of cartoons and I send them to the New Yorker. And before I had to be careful not to draw that and post it anywhere on social media before they've had a chance to look at it, because they would not buy it. I had never tested that with Happs. I don't know how they feel about video, but I'm pretty sure they would not want to take something that I've drawn online. So
that's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Peter, I'm wondering, have you tried to syndicate or sell any of the interview content, for example, from your guests, or repackage it? Would that be problematic? This is such an interesting industry, right? There's all of these things that most viewers probably wouldn't think about, but it's obviously important to be able to make a living here in a pretty tough industry, regardless of the medium.
Yeah, I mean, I have not tried to, sell any of this content. I don't know who would want to pick it up. It's not sort of exclusive in the way that like what Daniel is doing. These are generally just kind of conversations that I'm having with journalists, and it's more of a way for them to kind of talk about what they do. They're not really breaking news generally. What I will say is that it can be difficult to get people to come on. Like, if they work, especially for TV networks, they say, I need to get permission from our communications or our PR people. I need to get approval to like go on a show. So they would need to get that kind of sign off before they could come on, even though, I'm not competing with CNN. That's still kind of the general thing is, if you're going to go on another video platform, they need to get a sign off from their boss. So that's one thing that I found kind of difficult, is in reaching out to people, telling them what Happs is and what the show is, and trying to kind of give them that overview, so then they can go to their boss and they can say, I got this invite to come on this online show. Is it okay if I do it?
Interesting. Yeah. We had a question that Liza posed that I'd love to address. The issue of, do you think, Peter, given your experience and expertise, that issues of press freedom and harassment of journalists will improve with the new administration? I think it's worth considering. Absolutely. We'll also take your comments and questions here if you write them in the comments. So please do.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Liza. I think that the Biden administration will be better than the Trump administration in terms of how it relates to the press. But I feel like the post-Trump administration is still going to be very anti-press. So obviously you no longer have a president and administration that is demonizing the press. But we still live with the effects of that. There is a large percentage of people who follow the former president and who believe that the press undermined him and stole the election for Biden. And those kinds of people, the kinds of people that we saw on January 6th, I think are only going to become more entrenched in their hatred of the press. So I don't know if it'll get better in terms of, if you're covering especially like a right-wing demonstration, I think you're still going to find a lot of people who hate you, potentially people who hate you even more now that Trump is out of power. That said, I would hope that you will see less attacks on the press from the state, particularly from the federal government and hopefully from local law enforcement as well. I don't know how big a difference it will make. I mean, things were not great under the Obama administration either on a local level in terms of people getting arrested by the police. I would hope that, the Biden administration will encourage law enforcement to respect First Amendment rights, unlike Trump did, and then that will kind of trickle down, and so you'll see less of this kind of pose of seeing the press as opposition or lumping journalists in with protesters and then just arresting everyone. But I don't know how big of a difference it will be, because in some ways the cat is out of the bag as far as Trump and his supporters and other politicians on a local or state level who want to imitate Trump and are going to go after the media.
Fascinating.
One thing that I'm curious about, is just your perspectives in your various mediums about this, really challenging environment financially for media companies, of regardless of what medium you're talking about. Social media platforms have garnered a lot of power and leverage in the last 20 years, and it's obviously coming to a head here. Local newsrooms are just going under at a rate of hundreds per year throughout the United States alone. I think there's this tendency to have more extreme voices on both sides of the political spectrum being amplified online in social media platforms of all kinds. And I'm just curious if these are trends that concern you in your specific daily work. Are you do you feel the squeeze of the financial stresses of organizations as freelancers? Because all three of you, just like my background, rely on editors as gatekeepers of other organizations.
Well, I know that my colleagues who work for newspapers, editorial cartoonists, are definitely feeling the squeeze. Because newspapers are dying, local newspapers, and the model of the political cartoonist that worked, on staff for a newspaper is dissipating. So there are a very few of my colleagues who actually have a staff position on a newspaper. I'm not staff per se at the New Yorker, but I'm freelance, and it's still a struggle every week to try to get in there. The competition is always there. So in terms of newspapers, I feel that for my colleagues that the model is changing, and also humor, political humor is very popular, of course, with the comedians and the late night talk show hosts. So those comedians, and they're wonderful. I'm a huge fan. Their people will take clips of their nightly broadcast and put them out on social media, so that it kind of takes the place of what editorial cartoonists have typically done for centuries, commenting on the day's events in visual format. So it's hard, and that's why I've been trying to reinvent myself with live broadcasts, to see things that move and people that talk, not so much a static image. And I think people, maybe Peter was referring to this also, people like to see behind the scenes. They like to see the creators. They like to see the process of creating a cartoon or thinking about a cartoon, and share that with the creator. So,
yeah, absolutely. See how the sausage is made. Kind of take the veil off. Could use a number of metaphors, right, for the process, but take the veil off the sausage. I don't know. Any questions from the audience here before we wrap up? Any questions that our broadcaster panel have for one another here?
Well, I think we got a question from Helen Wallace. I don't know if you saw that or want to put that, on screen.
Good question. Yeah, reading it now. Thanks. I missed that, Helen. Sorry. So, do members of the press have a union in the U.S.? I'm a card-carrying member of the National Union of Journalists in the U.K., who are very very vocal about photographers and videographers' rights to film in public spaces, which has become a massive problem in the UK. So that's very interesting. I would love for one of our panelists to address that. Peter, maybe you could speak to that, given some of your close familiarity.
Yeah, I mean, I've written both about press freedom issues and about media union issues in the US. The general answer is that there is no sort of journalist union that covers everyone in the US. Traditionally, there have been unions at newspapers that were affiliated with the News Guild, which is now part of the Communication Workers of America. More recently, we've seen a drive to unionize digital news organizations, both by the News Guild and by the Writers Guild of America, which is primarily, they represent writers in Hollywood. That includes TV writers. And so there was some kind of moving over to representing TV news writers and then digital arms of TV news operations and then just digital news outlets. So there's an increasing amount of unionization in the American media industry, but there's nothing like what you have in the UK. Generally, in the US, these press freedom issues are championed by nonprofit organizations and professional organizations. So the American Civil Liberties Union fights for First Amendment rights, including journalists' First Amendment rights. You have organizations like the Reporters Committee for Freedom of Press, RCFP, which I worked very closely with when I was at Freedom of the Press Foundation. And I believe, Peter, you said that an RCFP attorney was interviewed recently on Happs.
So Liza,
So you have RCFP, you have organizations like the Society of Professional Journalists, you have state chapters of different ACLU, different state chapters of the ACLU, of the Society of Professional Journalists. You have organizations like the Society of Environmental Journalists who represent journalists from a specific beat. So in general, there are a lot of organizations that push for press freedom issues, including the right to report in public areas and to photograph public spaces. In particular, there is the National Press Photographers Association that represents a lot of photographers, such as photographers at places like the Daily News, and they are very aggressive about threatening to sue local governments that do not allow photographers to go to public areas and take photos. So I would say that there are a lot of groups in the US that fight for those press freedom issues, but they're generally not organized as unions. You do have the News Guild and you have the Writers Guild that represent an increasing number of media workers in the US, but they tend to focus more on workplace issues, issues of pay, issues of benefits, issues of just cause for layoffs and firings. And you have organizations that represent freelancers that try to protect freelancers' rights, but you don't really have an overarching union of journalists that advocates for First Amendment rights and for journalist privileges, I'd say.
Daniel, I'm curious if unionization is common in your line of work or in your particular area as well among freelancers.
Yeah, absolutely. They give us this press card at the NYPD issues it out. You got to prove that you either are working with an organization or a news company or have sold video and has been published in the either newspaper, magazine, or on TV in order to get it. But Peter mentioned an organization that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure if he's still the president or vice president of the Press Photographer Association, Todd Meisel. I know he was with the AM New York. He's an editor over there. But he is definitely one of the pioneers of this industry and is advocating a lot of those rights that Peter is talking about. One of those things, to be honest with you, is encryption of police radios. That's the biggest resource we have in finding out what's going on in the city, because you ask a police officer, he's been on the job for 10 or 15 years. You ask him, hey, is this guy going to be all right? Is it an arrest? He's like, I don't know. And it's hard to believe that, you've been on the job for 15 years and you don't know what's going on in the crime scene. I understand they're not allowed to tell you certain things, right. But, whether or not simple things that I'm going to find out anyway, and they don't like to see us there either. So, it's very important that people know their rights. I mean, if I'm with a cell phone or a $3,000 camera or a $30,000 camera, I'm allowed to be at that scene, whether or not I have a press pass. It's just they let the police department know over the radios that it's not illegal for the public to videotape you or film you doing your job. You're wearing a uniform. You're a public servant, and we're there to document it. To be honest with you, I always tell the officer they're the main star in my footage. Without them in that uniform, it's just a dull scene. You know what I'm saying? So they should be happy that they're the main model and star of the footage. Police going, lights, uniform on, and all that stuff. But they probably think I'm there to film the next Rodney King, and I'm really not. And if they do the Rodney King, then that's on them.
Yeah.
Daniel, you brought up a really interesting point, which is that in the U.S., the people who are responsible for credentialing the press, to the extent that anyone does, generally are the local police. And in New York, that means the NYPD. And I know there's been a push recently to take that out of the NYPD. Why should the NYPD be the one deciding who can cover them? Especially as, there are increasing, say, protests against NYPD policies. It seems like maybe there's a conflict of interest. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Absolutely. I'll be honest with you, Peter. I have this. It's around my neck. It helps. It doesn't help. I think it helps more with traffic stops, if anything, if I'm going to a government building. But while you're on the scene in the street, it really doesn't matter if you have that. I've covered a lot of the protests you talked about during the summertime. I've got my camera broken. I was attacked, but I defended my own. I stood up to them. A lot of them weren't even part of the organization that were protesting. They were just people trying to take advantage of a situation. So, right. But I've had my camera broken in those protests. I don't really do them anymore. Olea from Freedom News TV, she does that. She knows how to cover that. Her camera's a lot smaller than mine. But I feel that whoever is in charge of it, it's whatever for me. I'll get it just to get into press conferences and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, this really hasn't helped besides maybe one or two traffic stops.
Right. Interesting. Well, we do have to wrap it up. I just want to thank all of our panelists here on the Broadcaster Roundtable today for their time, sharing some of the behind-the-scenes work that they're doing. Everyone, please subscribe to Liza, Daniel, and Peter here today. Thank you for joining us. We will be back tomorrow in the morning Pacific time for some updates. So be sure to check that out. Pablo will post an upcoming post schedule, but I believe that should be at 11 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow with some cool announcements. So be sure to tune in. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Thank you, Peter. Good to meet you guys.
Of course.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah, I appreciate your time.